Hi everyone, my name is Eli Cohen and I got Chris Quilty here with me. Thanks for attending our session. We're going to start with a little bit of introductions, and really the topic of this discussion is all about the business of space from an investment standpoint, both in terms of how people invest in this market, be it private investments in private companies as well as public companies. Chris, do you want to say a few words of background about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Chris Quilty. I have been doing financial analysis on space companies for about 20 years. Originally, first 20 years at an investment bank called Raymond James, where when I started, I was the only analyst on Wall Street writing on the space industry. When I left in 2016 to start my own shop, I was the only analyst on Wall Street writing on the space industry. That has changed, and the capital markets have changed dramatically in really the last 5 to 7 years. And we work independently. I'm a small group of about 10 people. We do research, we do in-depth company research and technology research, and we do investment banking work in the space. And then again, I should note I began my career focused on the public companies, but we kind of work throughout the capital stack with private equity, venture capital, family offices. So we kind of take a full, broad stream look at the finance of the space industry.
My experience includes many years in venture capital as a partner in a local venture capital fund, Magma Venture Partners, as well as a number of years in mergers and acquisitions. I was heading M&A for a few internationally traded Israeli companies, Converse, and then Gilad Satellite Networks, which is how I actually got into the satellite and space industry. In last years, I've been working a lot also in the areas of investment banking, helping companies get sold, helping companies buy other companies, and also collaborating with Chris and his team. I think it's safe to say that beyond investments, we were involved in mergers and acquisitions or growth financing for, I would say, most, if not all, the mid to large size companies in the local ecosystem. There aren't that many, and we need more. Yeah. So maybe we'll start with talking a little bit about current events. And certainly over the last couple of years, we've seen hype and a rise in valuation and investments, a lot of interest in capital markets as well as private investments, in investments in general and in space in particular. We've seen from a macro perspective a number of down points, both on the macroeconomical level globally, as well as here in Israel, both political unrest as well as the recent events with Gaza. Chris, maybe we'll start with this. How do you see the local as well as the international, maybe focus on the international side, in light of the events in the last couple years as it relates to the space industry?
Yeah, well, maybe starting local. I think the first time I came to Israel, a decade or so ago, I think there were maybe about a half dozen companies here that we focused most of our energies on. I'm on the ground 3 days. We're probably seeing 36 companies on this trip. So, and that's indicative of what we're seeing globally. We do track startup activity, both domestically in the U.S. as well as globally. And there has been just a sea change. And there's really, I think, 3 things that have caused the current investment cycle we're seeing in the number of startups. One is the cost of launch. That's the most important equation. When you shave a zero off the cost of launch, activities that you might think you want to do but don't make economic sense suddenly do. And that's why you're seeing this explosion of companies, getting into things as far off as asteroid mining or lunar mining or doing in-space refueling. These companies are getting funded, and lots of them today. I think we've got over 450 companies, funded companies, we're tracking in that sort of cislunar domain. So cost of launch was critical. The other 2 things that have happened that are important to the industry, the space industry is capital intensive. And the sources of capital of how you could start up a company were fairly limited. We've had a handful of very important billionaires that have made their stake and made their, made it clear that they have an interest, most notably Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, that are not just, they're not investing in space. These are guys who believe the future is in space and they're putting their personal net worth towards it. But more importantly, the broader venture capital ecosystem has finally been opened up to the space industry. And to give you an idea of how dramatic it is, in the decade prior to 2015, there were 9 space companies a year globally that were backed by venture capital. And it averaged about 140 million a year. Since 2015, we've seen hundreds of companies funded and on average about $2 to $3 billion a year. That excludes the mega constellations. That doesn't include the 11 billion that Amazon spent on their launch contract. So that's talking about the smaller companies that are, sort of the lifeblood and a lot of the innovation that's in the industry. And I tell you, the third and final thing that's happened that I think is absolutely critical, in the space industry, you basically had one customer, which was the government, except for perhaps the SATCOM industry where you did have a commercial marketplace. And what we've seen, I think, dramatically in the US is the government is now turning the keys over to the commercial operators and saying, we want commercial companies to do this. I did a presentation yesterday and I highlighted that, NASA as an administration that built hardware, they've gotten out of the business of doing crew and cargo delivery to the space station. They've outsourced that at fixed price. They're even doing fixed price contracts to take payloads to the moon and humans to the moon. And you're seeing the Department of Defense moving towards an open procurement system, building this 500 satellite constellation, fixed price contracting, and it's dramatic, and it's creating huge opportunities for commercial companies, to both participate with government funding, but also to open up new venues of commercial growth.
Chris, what are some of the hot topics or themes for investment in space these days? And also, who are the investors? Who are those entities, both on the private and public market side, that are investing and maybe haven't been investing before?
Yeah, well, I already mentioned venture capital, so I won't delve into that. But, what I would say is we're seeing in the U.S. entire pools of government money made available for investing. There's organizations like the Defense Innovation Unit that was set up to act as a connecting point between Silicon Valley tech and the Defense Department. So that has become a huge area of growth. And oddly enough, we're seeing even a lot of private equity players, which typically, you're talking about leveraged buyouts and mature companies and, mergers and acquisitions, but there have been a number of companies, probably the most notable one in the US, AE Industrial Partners. They're a huge investor in Firefly, which is building integrated launch vehicles and landers. They also acquired and rolled up 7 companies into a now public company called Redwire. And I would also note, still in the earlier stages, you're now seeing commercial companies, and I'm talking large multinationals, whether it's pharmaceutical companies that are trying to figure out how to manufacture in space, or whether it's other companies that have, looking at lander technology and rovers and other ways that they can take, their core terrestrial technology and apply it in space.
So that's interesting. One of the themes that I've seen being more important now, and you mentioned AE Industrial Partners being essentially a defense-oriented investor. They are interested in the defense theme. And as a theme, defense has never been something that investors have been investing in, just given the governmental aspect of that particular industry. So we're seeing a lot more certification of defense-related investments as something that are investable, so to speak. And I think also recent global trends such as the war in Ukraine have highlighted the importance of satellite and space as it relates to new technologies and the importance of those technologies, not only in government, but also in civilian-related investment opportunities. So we see that here in Israel for sure. We have the large defense integrators here like IAI and Rafael doing a lot more these days. But But certainly defense has been an important investment theme in the last couple of years. What other investment themes are you seeing?
Well, just to follow on the government aspect, that was typically an area that venture capitalists didn't want to get involved in, of getting in front of the government and regulatory environment. But to give you an example, I was asked by a government agency to write a report about the future of space, and identified some critical technologies, and there were two that I said, hey, I think these are important, but I can't find any commercial application for them. And the two of them were active debris removal, astroscale, and nuclear thermal propulsion. Well, guess what? Within a year of writing that report, Astroscale got a contract from the Defense Innovation Unit, as did a company doing nuclear thermal propulsion. So you're seeing very targeted investments where the government is trying to drive the commercial entities in a certain direction. What was your question?
Yeah, so as it relates to Israel, how are you seeing the, progress of the industry here? And I also have a few thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question to you, which, we've been doing this for a while, coming over and talking to companies. And as I mentioned, it's tremendous growth in startups and a ton of innovation. It's one of the reasons I've made it a habit of visiting over the years. Israel tends to box above its weight class in all things space. And, we're seeing, with the Israeli Space Agency taking a stronger stance, and with the startup activity happening, it's a tough capital environment. We haven't talked about that. 2023, an English term called it sucked. It was a terrible year. I think the worst year since 2017 for capital raising. I mean, deal volume in Q4 was the worst in a decade. It was a tough year to raise capital. And that's coming off the back of 2020, the post-COVID, where the government flooded the market with capital, and you saw this crazy SPAC phenomenon and whatnot. We're dealing with the after effects of that in the US, and the capital environment has become very tight. Are you seeing that in Israel? And where are companies going to find it?
Yeah, so of course, macroeconomic situation has an impact on Israel as well as our own trouble, if you want to call it that way. But I want to talk about resilience, because I think today, the conference today, even the decision to do this conference today at this time is all about resilience. And what we've seen since the downturn of the economical markets last year, as well as through today, we're seeing resilience in the Israeli ecosystem. I think last year, after the macroeconomic downturn, we still saw a number of large investments and show of confidence in local ecosystem. And I would like to perhaps share a few examples on that, on all aspects of the market, both on the upstream, when you think about Ramon's space, being able to raise, I think, $26 million. That's a great one. Yeah. Another one was CropX. That's downstream, right? An application for precision agriculture, $30 million raise, made some acquisitions. That's tremendous. I also want to talk about Tomorrow.io, an Israeli or Israel-related weather system, raised $80 million. That's amazing. And now, not only it's an application, they're having their own satellites. It's really extraordinary. And another one, maybe a final thought on that, we're seeing Israeli industry not just as sellers, but also as buyers. And Gilad Satellite Networks in last year acquired a company in the US defense market. That's great. Israeli companies are coming of age, are growing, and I am optimistic about seeing a lot more of that in the coming period.
Yeah, and you did ask about other investment drivers and growth drivers for the industry. It's hard to call this a driver more than a reaction, which is China. We are seeing tons of decisions in the US made based upon how they are going to counter China. We're never going to build another international space station, but because the Chinese have one, we need a solution. So what NASA's done is they've gone out and funded 4 companies, now 3 because Northrop dropped out, to develop commercial space stations. And on the back of that investment, there's at least 6 companies that I know of that are not named, those 3 primary with NASA, that are also building space stations. Likewise, the U.S. Investment in things like the $2.6 billion CLIPS lunar program, yeah, they want to do some science, but they also want to get to those valuable regions of the moon before China turns it into the Spratly Islands.
So Chris, you go around, you see a lot of companies all over the world in the space industry. We like to think of ourselves here in Israel as a country with a lot of potential for our space industry. We typically joke that we're the 4th company to crash a lander on the moon. That's not a bad accomplishment,
Oh.
but we've now seen India as well as Japan land on the moon. What can a country that's not Japan, not the US, not Russia, not China in terms of resources, what does a middle-sized country, I would say Israel is not too small and certainly not too big, but an ecosystem of a country that's middle in its size or proportions, do? What are some of the case studies or the interesting observations you have in other countries that have an up-and-coming, successful space ecosystem from the investment perspective?
Yeah, so maybe I'll go run the range, right? Which is at the bottom end, you can build and launch a CubeSat and get it on orbit for $300,000 or $400,000, which was unimaginable, right, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you couldn't even, at any cost, you couldn't get the thing on orbit. You just couldn't get a launch vehicle. So again, back to the launch is really important. You know, 4 times a year, you can jump on a SpaceX transporter mission for a known fixed price and get your satellite on orbit. So even small countries can invest in a technology that gets people excited, you know, kids, universities, academic, to go out and test and be part of the space community. Then you have other models like, for example, Great Britain, which has put a huge investment into their Harwell Space Hub, where they're attracting in companies. They've been putting in huge government subsidy for technology development, tax breaks, R&D breaks. And I had a US company that left me and went over to the UK because they got a better deal. And then at maybe the other end of it, you've got countries like the UAE, which they have the money, you know, to make the investments for doing big things. And I think we'll see some of the other Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, you know, is getting a little bit more aggressive in their investment. And you know, look, there's a final interesting case study I can think of a country like Luxembourg, which doesn't have huge manufacturing capability or anything else, but you have a government entity that, you know, not only did they, through tax reasons, get, you know, the SESs and Intelsats of the world to domicile there, but they've also done a fantastic job of creating a space ecosystem, again, largely through tax and regulatory regimes. It's a bad bet, it was an early bet, but Luxembourg made themselves the space mining country. And so they've set up a regulatory regime that allows them, makes it a very attractive place for people that want to you know, follow that, because there's a lot of challenging space law you got to deal with when you're going out and taking stuff from outer space and bringing it back.
Yeah, I want to follow up on some of the case studies you provided. Certainly with Luxembourg, it was, and I got to speak with the head of space agency there. It was a predetermined decision on their part to have the space economy a substantial part of what they do. And it's an amazing success story. It is now, I think, 1% of their GDP, which is astounding. So predetermination as well as what I would call regulatory and taxation benefits have gotten them to that thing. The other thing is UAE and Middle East countries. I think certainly the Abraham Accords have opened the door and hopefully will continue to open the door for collaboration with Middle Eastern countries around such projects and such opportunities. And certainly I know that the space agency here in Israel is busy with that. Beyond that, I think Israel really has the seeds. What I mean by the seeds is we have the legacy. Israel was one of the first countries to build, launch, maintain satellites in space. One of the few countries that did that. One of the first countries that did that. And if you take into consideration the amazing ecosystem we got here of the downstream side, the AI, the ML, the cyber, the ability to know how to build, operate, finance, and then maybe sell or grow technology companies. These two skills together are the grains of what's needed to do an amazing space economy. And I think, yeah, I think we still have a chance of doing that with what we have around us.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.